Окей. Від імені національної
On behalf of the National, I'm welcoming you in Ukraine Crisis Media Center. My name is Oleg Sahagyan, political scientist, co-founder of the National Platform for Resilience and Cohesion. And today we have the meeting dedicated to the third anniversary of the full-scale war, the conclusions and the key challenges of the new stage of the combat for sovereignty. Implemented together with the European Union, institutional partners is institutional and Ukraine housing a group of human rights, two oldest organizations in Ukraine. We have today, I would like to introduce you, Andreas Umlet, analyst of the Stockholm Center for the East European Studies, also Dmytro Tepernik, international expert on security and stability issues at the Partnership for a Strong Ukraine Foundation, PhD in political science research at Getúlio Vargas Foundation, Brazil, and the Center for the East European and International Studies, Vicente Ferraro, Viktor Shlenchak, founder and chairman of the board of the Institute of World Politics. There are the speakers of the first panel, but then we will have the second panel where we will see not least famous and interesting speakers who we are going to talk today to. So, starting the first panel, I would like to ask Mr. Andreas to say a few words about, to share his impressions of the international perception of the Russian-Ukrainian relations in dynamics, especially recently. So there are some certain good things, for example, the elections in Germany. So, Mr. Umland, the floor is yours. Considering the fact that I'm going to talk about the international relations, I think that it's better to speak English.
Much of what I will be saying may be not so surprising to Ukrainian listeners and is perhaps more important to the foreign listeners and those who are watching us now. About the German elections, they are, I would say, ambivalent. They are in some ways not too bad. They're certainly not as problematic and as confusing as the American presidential elections were last year. And I was afraid slightly that they could be also ending with an unexpected result, and that the sociological research in Germany could be as unreliable as the American sociological research was concerning when it predicted the results of the presidential elections. But at the end of the day, most of the predictions of the sociologists were accurate, with the partial exception of the left party, which got far more than was predicted in the in sociological research. But we have now basically a situation in Germany where a two-party coalition is possible and likely dominated by the Christian Democratic Party, and with the likely Chancellor of Friedrich Merz, who has been visiting Ukraine several times and has made a whole number of encouraging statements about his support for Ukraine and his general understanding of this conflict and of Russia's intentions. So this is indeed a positive development here. I agree. The worrisome development is, of course, the rise of the German far right. The Alternative for Germany has doubled its electoral support in comparison to the last parliamentary elections, and will have now a large faction in the Bundestag, in the German parliament. It will be the largest opposition party, but not the only opposition party. That is also something not to be forgotten. So the likely coalition government will consist of the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, and there will be three strong opposition parties, one very strong, the Alternative for Germany, but also two other relatively strong opposition groups, the Greens and the Left that I mentioned already. So far, I think this is all one can really say about it, because we still have to wait for the outcome of the coalition talks that are now starting. They will not be as long as one would have feared if there were a need for a three-party coalition. That was also something possible, but now it's sufficient for two parties to form a majority. So therefore, maybe we don't have to wait for too long for a new government. For the time being, Chancellor Scholz and his government will remain in place, and then perhaps in April, perhaps even already in March, we will have the election of a new chancellor and a new government. But I also wanted to briefly touch a couple of other issues that I think are now rather important. Although I do think that the German internal affairs and the German coalition building is now also important for Ukrainians and for basically all Europeans and all sort of Western or pro-Western people, because Germany will play obviously a bigger role now that the US seems to be withdrawing from Europe, from international affairs in general, and is taking an incomprehensible, I would say from my side, approach to world politics. So we have now something of a repetition of the situation during Trump's first presidency, when Germany and under the Chancellor Angela Merkel was partly filling the gap that was left by Trump as president before. Now this will be even more urgent and even more consequential, how far Germany will be able to fill this gap. And in general, I agree. I'm not too pessimistic here. That apparently Friedrich Merz has the ambition and the understanding to at least try to fill this gap that will be left. The other topics I wanted to briefly touch upon are the now much discussed issue of the peacekeepers and peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, which I think is more problematic than sometimes said. The problem here is, the principal problem is here that usually in our sort of understanding of how peacekeeping functions is that peacekeeping is there to implement international law. And so you would have legitimate borders of a country, and then the peacekeepers would be on this border and would be sort of dividing the fighting sides, or in a civil war where they would be, of course, they're not on the state border, but there would be still some understanding that the peacekeeping is not just there to keep the peace, but also to implement international law. And here we would have the rather odd situation that if these peacekeepers are then positioned at a future contact line after a ceasefire is reached, they would be sort of implementing a violation of international law, and they would be in a certain sense supporting the annexations that Russia is trying to make. So this is a problematic aspect for me. I also believe that another issue that is also not sufficiently understood is that I don't think that these peacekeepers will, especially if they come from European countries, will have the freedom to engage in combat with Russian troops. I find it very difficult to imagine that these peacekeepers would have a mandate to actually then fight against Russia and to draw thereby European countries, NATO member countries, into a war a direct war with Russia. So I'm still wondering where this is all leading to. I think a much better idea, and there indeed you could talk about Western troops on Ukrainian ground, would be anti-aircraft troops and weaponry, and the implementation of a no-fly zone for Russian flying objects over either select places of Ukraine, cities and power plants and infrastructure and so on, of the government-controlled parts of Ukraine. So this would be something that, to me at least, would make much more sense than ground troops. And you know, I don't understand what their function would actually be. They would have a largely symbolic functions at the end, because and even the symbolic function would be ambivalent, as I indicate, if they, at the end, sort of ratify with their presence the annexations that Russia has made. I think the good old topic that we constantly need to return to is the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Budapest Memorandum. I think this is, to my mind at least, is the most important thing that one constantly has to mention, that this entire conflict and war and Ukraine's fate is not only about Ukraine and this war and this particular conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but it's about the international system, and in particular the non-proliferation regimes for nuclear weapons and also for chemical and biological weapons. Because this is not about, you know, what I often hear is that this is a fight between autocracy and democracy, and this is about freedom and non-freedom and so on. No, it's in the first instance, I think it is not about the liberal world order, but about the traditional world order. It's about inviolability of borders, is about territorial integrity, it's about national sovereignty, it's, in a way, it's about the Westphalian system, and not only about the international order that has emerged after World War II. And I think that is the entry point then to get national interests of other countries into the play here. And what is now, of course, happening is that not only Russia is violating the logic of the non-proliferation regime, now we also have North Korea as a nuclear weapon state outside the non-proliferation treaty fighting against Ukraine. And now we have yet another nuclear weapon state, the US, sort of almost assisting Russia in pressuring Ukraine into an unjust peace and extorting some sort of benefit out of this, which is explicitly forbidden in the Budapest Memorandum and signed by the United States and Russia and Great Britain. So this is now, I think, this remains to me the central point that should be emphasized in all communication, that if this happens to Ukraine, this can happen to any other country, and that means that other countries will simply arm themselves if they cannot rely on international law, on international organizations, on international solidarity anymore. That basically, if we at the end have an unjust ceasefire or an unjust peace, this will simply send the signal that everybody is on himself or herself, and that what you need is really weapons of mass destruction in order to secure your national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and borders. And that's, therefore, it's an extremely dangerous development for the entire world.
Дякую, Андреас. Якщо можна...
Thank you, Andreas. I will consume a bit more of your time, but I will ask you the brief questions. So what is your perception of so the US, Britain, France, and we can see that not the financial power is more important, but the military power, and it's obvious that Germany starts with worse positions. So what is your perception in these of the situation in these three states?
I was a little bit hesitant to go too much into the future because we don't yet have a new government, and the sounds that Friedrich Merz has been making are very good, you know, and he has been even bold enough to speak about the Taurus cruise missiles, although this is a very unpopular topic in Germany. So we have in Germany actually a majority of people we know this from sociological research, who are against giving Ukraine these Taurus cruise missiles. Although we have at the same time also a majority of Germans who are for military support for Ukraine, but not this particular weapon, because many Germans believe that this particular drag Germany into the war and will be the start of World War III and nuclear war and so on. So that is the problem here that I see. So we will have I think a new government and also a new foreign policy of this new government, with the focus on European alliance building with Great Britain and with France. I would also add here Poland and perhaps even Italy. I think Poland in any way, I think will play a much bigger role in the future than in the past. So I would rather think here of a four-country, perhaps even five-country alliance that could take a certain leadership role. But how much this will be then sort of actually possible and how this will be implemented and how far the German public will support that, that is still to me a question, and there's still work to be done to persuade the majority of Germans that we actually need to go forward. We need to be more resolute. We need to provide more weapons, and we need this leadership from Germany, which is an unusual thing for Germany to provide such leadership. But basically, as far as I understand, there's no competition for leadership in Europe. It's rather that people want more German leadership, and it will be a collective leadership anyway. It will not be like a Germany goes its own way. So. We will have to see what another factor yet I have not mentioned here is which politicians of the Social Democratic Party will be in the new government, because there are two wings basically in the Social Democratic Party. One is more pacifist and sort of still lives in this old world, people like Mützenich and Stegner, and then we have more sort of resolute politicians like the current defense minister Boris Pistorius, also the head of the party Lars Klingbeil, I would put in this camp. If they are going to dominate the social democratic representation in the future government, that would be good. Scholz will not be part of the new government. He has already said that he's leaving politics. And then the question is which social democrats and also which Christian Democrats are going to be then in the leading, because you also have a certain variety of views there. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait for this, and I'm hesitant to give any sort of clear. But I do agree with you what you said in the beginning, that in general I would think the outcome is good, but how good exactly it will be, it's still open for me.
Дякую, Андреас.
Thank you, Andreas. And now from the German context, we will move to the Baltic countries. And I'm passing the floor to Mr. Dmytro. Estonia is the state which from the very beginning was in the same boat with Ukraine. That is what they felt, considering the threats we had. And especially it is now felt due to the US instability. And by the way, my greetings to the Independence Days of Estonia, 24th of February. That is a date with a very big symbolic meaning for both of the states. And therefore, the dynamics from Estonia seemed a bit different than from the other countries. So I would like to hear how these 3 years are perceived in Estonia. How do you perceive the challenges we have? And once again, I would like to thank you for the outstanding support of Ukraine, which was next to Ukraine all this time. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you. And first of all, my personal comment on the results of the elections in Germany. In my opinion, why do we need these political occupation? If we look at the electoral map of Germany, and they are working on this. But as for Estonia and Baltic countries, I'm also going to switch into English.
Just a few days ago, it's Independence Day, and obviously it is very symbolic, and Ukraine is in our hearts and minds. So our celebrations 3 years ago and onwards let's say, are not so happy anymore. So all our establishment and our leaders, of course, reminded our publics that the war is going on. But I think I can tell kind of general situation, not just in my country, which actually resisted the Russian aggression 107 years ago, and we won our freedom in the battles. And Ukraine, I think, now reminded also ourselves, but also other nations, that freedom is not free, and you have to fight for your freedom. And I think it's time to think back about kind of three major perspectives during the 3 years, and I would emphasize three main senses that have transformed during the last 3 years, which have changed. So first of all, I would emphasize the sense of war. So I think now the sense of war has transformed from hypothetical in our region, in the Baltics, to plausible, possible, or even probable. So there is understanding that the war might be coming. So it's not just somewhere there, it's not just between Russia and Ukraine, but it might be. It's quite probable that the Baltic states might see the Russian aggression on their territories. But we are still optimistic because Ukraine demonstrated that actually the war might be winnable under certain circumstances. So there is no kind of fear against Russia anymore. So there are proofs that we together can win that kind of war, and Russia is actually very weak. The second sense which has transformed, I think, is the sense of resilience. Because before the war, before the full-fledged war and invasion 3 years ago, I think many experts and politicians used resilience as kind of crisis-focused. But during the war, that kind of sense of resilience transformed from crisis-focused through survival-oriented, and obviously in Ukraine it is still an issue, but more and more I see and read that sense of resilience is endurance and recovery inspired. So we are now talking more about how to endure in these circumstances and how to recover. And it's, I think, also a good step that gives us a strong hope to find a new modus operandi for strengthening societal resilience. And the third sense, which also has transformed, is, I would say, sense of geography. That, of course, we knew that geography is our destiny, and we have our neighbors. But then during the last 3 years, Finland and Sweden joined NATO, which we are very happy about. And now if you look at the geography, we can actually see, again, a possibility or a probability for new alliances to be formed. Not even talking about 3 seas. Maybe we should talk about 4 seas. We have the Baltic Sea, we have the Black Sea, we have the Mediterranean, and we have the North Sea. Bearing in mind, of course, the Great Britain, Norway, maybe the Netherlands, and some other countries. So that could be, kind of a greater European alliance, which is determined not just also by the geography, but also by shared values. And I think a sense of unity is also transforming now, changing from declarative into more, let's say, actionable and supportive. So it's still, of course, to be seen, remains to be seen, what kind of actions European nations and European leaders will be taken. But I think the unity will be much stronger. And I think Europeans and also we in the Baltics are more talking about ourselves, not so much about Russia anymore. I think it's kind of very big shift, because at the beginning of full-fledged invasion, we were quite focusing on the Russian aggression and the Russian crimes and the Russian actions. But I think now it's time again to think what we could do within the European Union and within our countries. So that kind of unity, I think, is very welcome. Thank you.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you very much. In 2 words, speaking of the situation in Baltic countries, how in Baltic countries it is felt the threat of the militarization with hybrid methods in Baltic Sea. They are tearing the anchors, or there are the boats without identification signs. So how relevant is this issue in Baltic countries, and in which modus?
A pressing issue there. Well, again, my country, along with Latvia, Lithuania, and other countries, belonged to the camp of countries under "we told you so." Many years ago, we told you, not you, but other people in the West, about the Russian threats and about the hybrid threats and everything like that. And also, we told them so about the vulnerability of undersea infrastructure. So there are many reports and many analytics has been done in that regard, but it's not so reliable that maybe during peacetime, but if you have such neighbor, then it is a vulnerability for your electricity, for your gas pipelines, or internet cables, and so on and so forth. Well, there is no chance for us to increase the response to that threat rapidly. I think the political courage is there, at least what I can see in Estonia and Finland and Sweden, and I think all the countries around the Baltic Sea actually should take more decisive steps to protect the undersea infrastructure and actually sanction ships, Russians or Chinese ships there, because it is mostly an internal NATO lake, so it's not kind of free sea anymore, and especially if there are kind of proof attributions and evidence that Russia or China affiliated ships are damaging this infrastructure, and Russia, China, or other countries, so-called shadow fleet, is actually trying to avoid sanctions. So I think our navies together again, under NATO or maybe European umbrella, are able to control the sea traffic, let's say, in a more assertive ways. So political decision, I think, well, not decision, political will is there. What is missing is decision, but I think we are getting there. So I think there will be no kind of parties for Russian or Chinese ships anymore.
Дякую. Я думаю, якраз в останнім
Thank you. I think in the last sentences we had a very interesting aspect that the NATO ships, the EU partnership, or actually any other kind of union will have to undertake the responsibility for the hybrid aggressive actions in Baltic countries. So I guess that is the main question. But let's talk about the Brazilian view over the situation. And I would like to ask you, I know that recently you have been to Ivano-Frankivsk, that you are studying the war of the Russian Federation in Ukraine and the Russian policy regarding its neighbors, both internal and external. And at the same time, that is internal and external policy of the Russian Federation. So what is, in your opinion, happening in Ukraine? But as a person who is abroad but who dives deep into this situation, what is the dynamics of this war during the last 3 years? Maybe you can share what was happening and how it was changing, and where are we now, considering the challenges and the threats for Brazil?
Everyone. So I will talk now about from a different perspective from South America. And firstly, I think I have to say that it's difficult to say that what's the Brazilian position, no? Because there are many divisions in the society, but I can say that we can divide like the position of Brazil in 3 groups. The first group is the society. I'm sure that the society fully supports Ukraine. So the Brazilian society is supporting Ukraine. The Brazilian society see what Russia is doing, like in Ukraine, like the aggression against Ukraine. So I will not talk so much about the Brazilian society. The second part of Brazil that I would like to tell about to you is the academia. So in academia, we have a big problem that many scholars, unfortunately, they support Russia. Why do they support Russia? I will try to explain you the reasons for this problem now that we have there. First, there are some scholars that study Russian politics, Russian foreign policy, not Russian domestic politics, but Russian foreign policy. And most of these scholars, they are Russophiles, no? So they studied Russia because they like Russia, so they chose this topic. So this is the first reason. Like when the war started, we don't have so many specialists on Ukrainian politics, so the mass media invited people that were closer to the subject. And these people were people that are specialists on Russian politics. So these people were invited to talk about the war in the media. And they had some influence in the Brazilian society and in the Brazilian academia. The second reason for the support towards Russia is that we have like huge social problems in Brazil, and many scholars have some kind of nostalgia towards the Soviet Union. So they think that the Soviet Union was a country that tried to solve social economic problems, and they were in some degree successful to fight poverty and other stuff, other social problems. So there is a romanticization about the Soviet past, like not what Soviet Union was, but what Soviet Union said to foreign people that they were, that completely different things. And so these scholars, they have this romanticized view about the Soviet Union, and they think that Russia is, in some degree, a continuation of the Soviet Union. All the time I tell them that Russia has nothing to do with the Soviet Union. He's a far-right politician, like a fascist politician, but they think that Putin is the continuation of the Soviet Union. And the third factor is the anti-Americanism. We had many problems with the United States in the past, like we had during the Cold War, we had a dictatorship. The United States supported this dictatorship. So until now, our relations towards the United States, when in academia, when we saw that in the past they spoke about democracy, but they supported our military dictatorship in Brazil. So until now, there are some resentment towards the United States, and there is a view that the United States is an imperialistic, and indeed it is. In Latin America, we faced the American imperialism for many decades, not only the Cold War, but even before. And so there is a very negative view towards NATO. And like NATO is perceived as an arm of the American imperialism. So these are the three reasons for why in academia many people support Russia. I am a part of a minority in Brazilian academia that try to show that, yes, we had the American imperialism, but what Russia does in Eastern Europe is the same, even worse, than what the US has done to us. No? So we had the American imperialism, but you have Russian imperialism. So I try to show to Brazilian society that Brazil and Ukraine are on the same boat. Like we both were countries that suffered because of imperialism. So these are the divisions in academia. The other divisions are in politics, so the political elites. The left-wing parties, now we have a left-wing party in the government, they mostly support Russia because of the anti-Americanism, and the right-wing parties, sometimes they support Russia, not because of the anti-Americanism, but because Putin is a conservative and right-wing politician. No? So Putin managed to have the attention from the left wing and the right wing. And a third factor in the politics are the BRICS. So we have in Brazil a perception that the American hegemony is failing. So the US is not the same country, the same power that they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The world order is changing, and we have to be prepared for this change. And so BRICS is perceived as an organization that can help us to be better positioned in this world order changed. And BRICS is important not because of Russia, but because of China. China now is our main economic partner. China maybe will be ahead of the US in the next 10 or 20 years, or 20 years. So we have to keep good relations with China. Not? So, and once Russia is inside BRICS, we try to keep like normal relations with Russia. And to finish my speech, I would like to recommend. I have some recommendations for Ukrainians to reach people, not only in Brazil, but in the South, in the global South, because I consider that what I mentioned to you is not only related to Brazil, but to Latin America and to other global South states. I think that you, Ukrainians, you have to focus on what you have in common to the global South. What you have in common, like the history of imperialism, colonialism, oppression. So you have to show the world that it's not a war only about democracy or non-democracy. It's a war against imperialism, that it's not new. You have been fighting Russian imperialism for a long time, for decades, for centuries. So you have to show this to global South, like to show that you also are and were victims of imperialism. And as Professor Andreas mentioned, like that this is a fight also against authoritarianism. So you are fighting because you want a democratic state, and you know that Russia, Putin is an authoritarian regime, and you don't want this regime for you here in Ukraine. No? So, and the last factor is, I think you have to show why you are trying to become a NATO members. It's not because you love the US, it's not because you think that the US is the best country in the world, but because it is a resource to contain Russian imperialism. So I think that if you show it to Global South, to other Global South states, you will be more successful in conquer like minds and hearts in the Global South. Thank you very much for your attention.
Дякую дуже, Вінсенте.
Thank you, Vincent. So I would like to clarify. So if we take the perception 3 years ago and the perception today, so how would you characterize in 2 words briefly how these dynamics is moving? Whether we have more understanding or less, more support or less support, whether it is perceived as the part of one global resistance or there is more understanding of the local nature of this situation. How would you characterize it?
На великий жаль, я думаю, що зараз гірше. На початку була поляризація в академії.
In the beginning, we had polarization in Ukraine. I cannot be talking only about the academical circles, and therefore I'm talking about academical circles. In the beginning, we had polarization. A few people supported the Russian Federation, and a few supported Ukraine. And at the moment, I think that everything is changing, and I think that I know that there are the people, the minority, and maybe that is due to the fact that the situation for Ukraine is very complicated now. And these people who in the beginning were saying that this war is, you will never win in this war. Now they see, and even the U.S. They support, and they say that it's impossible. They say that it's impossible to win this war, and I think that situation has become more complicated for those who are supporting Ukraine. But nevertheless, that's just in the academical circles. As I already mentioned, Brazilian society all in all supports Ukraine and knows that that is the act of aggression, that is imperialism, and academy is the small part of the society, and the majority supports Ukraine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vincent. And now we will return to Ukraine, and Mr. Viktor Shchenchuk, he has quite a responsible role to present the Ukrainian perception of the challenges and the dynamics of the 3 years of the full-scale war. Of course, I do not want that to be a burden, and Mr. Viktor, you are free to tell your opinion, also considering the fact that you have returned recently from the Munich non-security conference, and at the moment we are still discussing what was happening there and what new Munich conference gave us. Everyone was afraid of Munich, so there was a dialogue of the blind with deaf. But Mr. Viktor, your 7 minutes for your reflections on the international security and the situation between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and 11 years of war in general. Good morning, everyone. I want to say that, well, the time flies by so fast, and after Munich, it's been 10 days, but it seems like half a year passed by, because the situation is so dynamic, and sometimes you even have no time to analyze some events, even though some processes which were happening there before Munich are related to the elections in the US and after Munich, which happened after the elections in the US. So all of these are the parts of one big chain. And we absolutely understand that at the moment we just see those strategies which some countries had, and they are more precise, they are more clear. And when we are talking about the biggest countries, in this case, these strategies, they have never changed. It concerns both the Russian Federation, it concerns the US, and also it concerns China. Why these conclusions? So first of all, China, before this time, until now, it moves toward its strategic target to become the leader in the world, and China is trying to get the new markets after COVID, after the economy decrease, and they cannot reach the pre-COVID level. But nevertheless, China is striving to develop economical relations, and through economical relations to develop their own power. And we have to understand the philosophy of China. For Chinese, so they have China and the rest of the world. And in fact, they do not consider Ukraine as a big country. And the Russian Federation, by the way, is also not considered as a big state. They consider it a regional conflict. And this regional conflict, despite the fact that it affects the economical processes, it's not a global one where China would have to contribute. But using this situation is, of course, something that China likes. And as for speaking of the US, during the previous presidency, the tactics of the US was that you have to soak as much blood from the Russian Federation and weakening the former possible competitor, but the main objective was to get to the big competitive level with the RCP, with China, and China was always a big player. The US was planning to have, if not confrontation, then I hope that not some kind of big war, but at least to have them as a big enemy. So you remember that previous president was meeting Xi Jinping, and the current president is going to meet Xi Jinping, and all of these things show that these two countries, in fact, consider that this three-party track is going to be the main one for the world. And in fact, when we are talking about the Russian Federation, in this case, we can see that there is always the fifth wheel. And the Russian Federation has its strategy, and the Russian Federation did not forget about its strategy. The Russian Federation wants to be at the table with the US and China to divide the spheres of influence. And this strategy is something that is still in mind of the Russian Federation. From the very beginning, when the full-scale war in Ukraine was started, they considered that it's going to be the element of pressure on Europe, first of all, but also that's going to be the element of pressure for the US, for China, so that they would perceive Russian Federation as the equal player. And in this case, we have to say that in the Russian Federation, some things they are managing to do much better than we were forecasting that 3 years ago. After Trump became the president, we can see that Trump decided to use not the ways the previous presidents used, but they want to tear the Russian Federation from China as a resource base. And the last weeks of walking around some kind of discussions, meetings in Eriard, and all of that are the elements of big puzzle, so that the Russian Federation would be so to tear it to tear their friendship with China. By the way, yesterday we saw that Xi Jinping has responded it, and there was the phone call with Putin. And yesterday, China has stated about the peace group, which is for some reason is going to meet in New York regarding Ukraine. And all of these is in the framework of those triangle, which will try to divide the spheres of influence, which is going to try to divide the spheres of influence in Europe. And here, of course, returning to our question, in this case, it's very important that after the Munich conference, things have heard behind the curtains. Finally, we can see those motto Ukraine was speaking about, that Ukraine is Europe. And in fact, now Ukraine becomes the shield for Europe so that we won't become the victim among the other predators who are ready to tear it apart, to make it weaker through right radical governments, through different psyop and other things. So therefore, now we have a task. The task of Europe is not just to retain Ukraine, but also to help us to resist. And second of all, they know that we are the shield, which in this case can protect Europe from the threats from the stronger players. And therefore, recapping all of what I've said, Munich has woken up lots of European leaders. And now they understand that they do not have time and you have to act now. The only question is that between the understanding and actions, there is time, sometimes too much time, and it's important not to waste this time now. Thank you, Mr. Victor. We have just a few more minutes to accept the questions, if there are other questions from the audience or online. And while the questions are getting ready, I think that in the discussions, we as usual are paying attention to what we say, but when we are talking about geopolicy, I haven't heard, for example, about India. Nobody was speaking about India and Indian elephant in the corner of this room, and about other subjects which, in my opinion, can play their role in the recent future. Considering the fact that I see no raised hands, I think that is something you can give a comment on. Well, in fact, we are not talking about many players who also think that they can become not just the players, but big regional leaders. We are not talking about India, about the Republic of Turkey, and about a few other centers which might appear. By the way, I have forgotten to say that when we started to talk to the Europeans, and there was the question of NATO. Another question starts to become very crucial because during Merkel's times, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Mr. Umlan can correct me, there was an idea of establishment of the European army, of the European armed forces. And at that point, it was not supported by the European leaders. And now, Merz has started to say that in the short-term perspective, we have to be thinking about this project because sooner or later, Europe will face the situation when Trump's words about leaving NATO, it will become not just words, but will become reality. And in this case, these huge alliances will lose the perspective for expansion, and also we will not know where can we move forward because we have it in our constitution. So we have to understand that for the future, this kind of defense alliance can appear. And moreover, Ukraine can become the initiator of the establishment of the defense alliance, so mainly with Baltic countries, with the countries which are our neighbors, for example, Poland, the UK, maybe France. It depends on what will be the results of the next elections, and also Scandinavian countries. So, in fact, we have some kind of these possible defense alliance. The only thing is that we have to move from the projects to the real actions, because once again, there are lots of the leaders behind the curtains. They were saying the right words, but nevertheless. Lots of them are depending on the electoral cycles. Many of them consider that the economy is struggling, and they have to think where they can find money, and all of this takes time and time and time. And I wish these processes were much faster. It's symptomatical that we are speaking more and more about Europe and not the European Union or NATO. So we had the question whether it's going to duplicate the same structures, NATO structures, which were established by NATO. And now everyone understands that it's not substituting, but it's a comprehensive approach. But the European army. Good afternoon, everyone. Military, the armed forces of Ukraine. After your speech, I had the question. The Munich conference and the statements of some of the leaders. Don't you think that 3 years of when the armed forces of Ukraine had a big role in Ukrainian independence, in recovery of the military strength of Ukraine, and when these process, Europeization or consumption of by bigger players, the US, the Russian Federation, and China, won't the armed forces of Ukraine become less important, and won't it? And when the new army structure will be established, will the armed forces of Ukraine, won't they disappear? How we can preserve this potential and how not to disappear? Because armed forces of Ukraine, after peace, big countries will be would like to have revenge, and the Russian Federation will try to demilitarize by all the counteractions to demilitarize Ukraine. Yes, the hybrid resistance, the hybrid war isn't going so well. In fact, that is a question to the politicians, and I think that there is a possibility to pack and to sell these military capital we have to Europe, considering the fact that the US in mid-term perspective are going to withdraw the troops from the military bases, and there is information about decreasing military bases in Europe, and in this case, Ukrainian armed forces can substitute some certain contingents. And in fact, that is something we are working on, as far as I know. That is something that is being discussed, and this idea can bring different benefits to Ukraine. Thank you very much, and if there are no further comments in this case, I suggest to move forward to the second panel of our discussion. I would like to thank the speakers of the first panel. I would like to thank you for your thoughts, for sharing them. And today, according to the results of this discussion, we will form the list of the questions for the future panel discussions. And it seems to me that one of them should have been called between Putin and Trump. But that is something that we will leave for the future discussions. And while the speakers of the first panel are joining the audience, I suggest the participants of the second panel to join us. Mr. Lupatsiy, Yevhen Glipovitsky, expert on long-term strategies, director of the Frontier Institute, Yulia Tyshchenko, the co-founder of the National Platform for Resilience and Cohesion, and Rafat Shadabarov, chairman of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people. And also online, we have Andriy Romanenko, the regional coordinator of the National Platform for Resilience and Cohesion in Donetsk region, and Alexei Antepovich, director of the sociological group Rating. Greetings, dear colleagues. The second panel has the name Policy of Strengths and Recommendations to the so we will be talking about the resilience, which is not perceived only as the threat, former threat, but it became the part of our nowadays, and it shows how we are able to resist different challenges. But before this, you have the unique possibility, which our previous panelists didn't have. You can have blitz 30-45 seconds to respond, maybe to add something, and maybe to express your short thoughts on the topic which we were discussing with your colleagues during the previous panel. So please, let's start with me and then from me, and let's move forward. Well, speaking of the external policy, the reflection I have is that I think that Trump's administration and those priorities which Mr. Swanchuk was mentioning is, in this case, both Ukraine and Europe did not overcome one important thing. We were talking a lot about the need to recover geopolitical integrity of Europe, but this statement didn't find conceptualization and some political dimension. And the key problem is that the US does not perceive Europe as the equal partner, because Europe was not able to go further than Europe-oriented approach. So the war in Ukraine has showed the international solidarity, and even Ramstein format, it went beyond the Euro-Atlantic format, because the countries which supported Ukraine and joined these resilience to authoritarianism, it's not European, it's not Euro-Atlantic, it's Euro-Asian one. And therefore, the question of the initiatives of external foreign policies, and in this case, we are talking about Euro-Asian Conference of Europe, and the attempt to conceptualize these countries independent of the position of the US in this situation. Thank you, Mr. Volodymyr. Yulia? Well, I think that in this case, we have even more questions than we have answers. And I think that Ukraine plays a role of a factor which can make the European Union closer. I didn't know what we can say about Euro-Asian. I'm just afraid of these words, to be honest. But nevertheless, Ukraine today and Europe in general, and in this case we are talking about the countries which are typically called the global south. Well, in those horrible situations when in a few days everything changed upside down in evaluation of what is going on, but it's even easier to get the support of supporting the framework of the discourse, as it was mentioned today regarding the Latin America in support of Ukraine. By the way, yesterday this voting in the Security Council, that is some kind of certain metaphor and illustration of those processes. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Yulia. Mr. Rifat. In my opinion, the world is now has to decide whether you have to continue looking for the ways to resolve all the issues on the grounds of those principles which we had after the Second World War, or to accept the suggestions, the offers of pragmatism, and consider the later relations with the world through the lens of different offers which have more, so to say, are more commercial. And it's quite weird, but I think that it depends on Ukraine what the world will choose. Mr. Yevhen, well, I think that we are observing the continuation of gating Kyiv in 3 days because the basics of the Ukrainian resilience, that is what we will come to, I hope. It's not something you can see through the lens which the institutional world uses. But I think the most ironic thing about it is that the narrative regarding the global south was destroyed, that Ukraine is the toy in the hands of the US, and that Ukraine is not the subject to political activities. And Ukraine is trying to get to the Euro-Atlantic Union on its own conditions. And if it's not meeting what the European Union and what the Europe wants, and in this case, I think I can risk, and I can say my impression of what I see now, I think that the strongest character of the Ukrainian president is that he knows how to talk to the street gangs. And this is internal, as far as I understand, from his childhood, something he took from his childhood. That is something we can see it during the press conferences he is given. We can see it in different, which we can see in his different actions in the beginning of the full-scale war and now. Not only with the street gangs, but also with the people from the American construction business. Mr. Andrei, your 45 seconds. Thank you very much. I think that Ukraine was very proud that we are in the center of Europe, and now we have the opportunity to feel that we are the center, to feel the center of the political world. And I think that it's going to be a very interesting experience and very interesting challenge for the entire Ukraine and entire Ukrainian society, for the government, for business, for everyone, and how it is to be the part of this world, of this global world, and how it is like to try to find your place in this world. And that is very interesting. Thank you very much. And Mr. Oleksiy Antipovich, your reflection. I can agree with my colleagues that it's probably the best time, and probably we have never had the role we have now, or the engagement of the international markets, and that is the different stage, different conditions, and the different challenges Ukraine has. And therefore it's a hard time, but we will overcome it. Thank you, Mr. Oleksiy. And now we are moving to our discussion regarding the internal resilience, the conclusions of the 3 years of the full-scale war, and the conclusions for the next war. Please bring Mr. Oleksiy back, and I would like to give him the word. He can give us understanding who are we and where are we. So, Mr. Oleksiy, as usual, I know that You usually have slides, you have numbers, and you have something about us. So the floor is yours. The only thing is I'm going to strictly moderate the time up to 6 minutes. On the 5th minute, I will tell you that 1 minute is left. Thank you, Oleg. If you don't mind, I will show a few slides. Can you see them? Yes, we can see them. The only thing is maybe you can open it full screen. Technical issues.
Ну, в принципі, видно. Нам просто видно і наступні слайди малі. Але все плюс-мінус читаємо.
Отак краще.
Супер. Так.
Так. Отже, ну, за 3 роки, звичайно,
So in 3 years, Ukrainian society had lots of stages of development. The first one is internal mobilization and internal resilience in the first days. And we have united under one flag. And of course, the things regarding the army was uniting us, and the level of patriotism was very strong, and that was our 2022. In 2023, we were in some certain euphoria. We went to Moscow. We were winning the battles in our illusions, but the real situation on the front line, well, we're not that efficient, and we came to some certain moment, which you can see on the slide, that the situation in the beginning of 2022, 2024, we started to relate it more negatively. Though Ukrainians were evaluating the development of their state more negatively. And in 3 years, if we're talking about the latest period, Ukrainians evaluate relations with people and believe that. And as for the topic of our research and the topic of this meeting, we can see that 50% of Ukrainians are talking about our internal cohesion and that it has decreased. And of course, that is a pity, because we can see that now we observe more, we see that it's more kind of hope and not the belief that we will win. And of course, when the war takes so long, it affects the moods in the society. A lot of ones want some pause, but no one is ready to give up our territories, and the punishment for those who are the real reasons of this war is important. And we would like to get our victory or peace. So now we are talking about Ukrainians who are willing to have the peace agreement. And we can see that internal threats, economical threats, are evaluated as more possible than the massive attacks or the further occupation of the territories. That is, it is a positive information, because we believe that armed forces of Ukraine are able to protect us, to preserve the territories, and therefore it is the situation is on the front line is related positively, but internal situation, of course, is more negative. Speaking of our resilience, we can see how in 3 years the new lines have changed. If the economical wealth and economical degree, so they can unite the positive and degrees. In this case, if we are talking about a language or belief, they exist, and they are more working for some kind of polarization, but there is no difference between Ukrainian society in the east or in the west of Ukraine, and how we perceive the Russian Federation and support Ukrainian integrity, and that is something we are fighting for. But nevertheless, we can say that considering the way we can evaluate politics and the elections, which can polarize people, and Ukrainians are emphasizing that because during the elections we can have polarization we do not need at the moment. And that is going to be an issue for us as a society, and we have different experience of the war in different regions and of different Ukrainians, because the fact because when people are losing their homes, their lives, disability, that is experience of each individual in Ukraine and affects the situation. And it also matters whether the person was an IDP or not. That is a thing which is, in my opinion, will require some certain corrections on the level of the society, on the state, and that is something that we have to do to retain our cohesion. Now, the question whether you are willing to flee. Around 8% of Ukrainians in general say that in the future they are planning to move to another country from Ukraine. Another 8% within the region. The percentage is quite small, but at the same time, we have 38% of people who were planning to leave the region where they are residing at the moment. On the one hand, that is objective, but on the other hand, it's fine. People are looking for the new impressions, for the new experience. It's not bad, but it can become critical, for at least on the level of some certain communities, regions, cities, villages, and of course, as a result, in Ukraine in general, if we consider the situation this way. But the main thing which is identifying the resilience, that is the belief in victory, which has changed significantly in 3 years. Of course, it's still high, but it becomes relevantly high. It becomes kind of desire. So on this slide, you can see that in the beginning of the full-scale war, in the first days of war, majority was saying that people were looking the place at some certain place, so they were not confident in the armed forces of Ukraine. And in April, May, we have 2022. In this case, we have the people thinking that we have to refuse from any kind of negotiations and fight till we get back all the territories. And we have this opinion for 1 year and 1 year and a half till autumn 2024, when the counteroffensive was stopped, which was supported in media, and Ukrainians had very big hopes and got weapons from the other states. And since that time, we have the decrease of the idea about the refusal from any kind of the negotiations and fighting till we get back all the territories. At the moment, this situation is supported by only 13%, and around 80% said that the real way to finish the war is a compromise decision, but in negotiations and engage in other states. And I would like to draw your attention to this, because the international guarantees in this case play the key role. Because if you ask if we need to return the occupied territories or not. Of course, people will say that yes, because that are our territories. 1 minute left. Well, I mean that negotiation process is something that people are looking for, but on the other hand, it does not foresee any kind of consensus with the Russian Federation. And on this slide, you can see that only 2% say that we have to agree on any kind of conditions, and the majority says that we need the guarantees, security guarantees, and if we if we ceasefire. And around 10% of Ukrainians are not ready to have any kind of negotiation. They are not going to ceasefire. They are ready to fight till the end. So that is a brief information on this, and a few things about the evaluation of our President Volodymyr Zelensky. That is regarding the 4% mentioned by the Trump, and you can see the dynamics of the support of the president is high, and it had that decrease after 2023 and the beginning of 2024. But even Trump's statements gave plus 8% to Zelensky, and the last time we measured it is after Trump mentioned these 4%, and Ukrainians gathered around the flag once again. So that is a brief information about the moods in Ukrainian society. Thank you, Mr. Alexei. Considering the fact that we took a bit more time, so we are moving forward to the next speakers who will interpret your numbers. Thank you very much, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Lupatsiy. Mr. Volodymyr, your 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Antipovich. You gave us the numbers regarding Ukraine, but I would like to say that for Ukraine, it is very important when we are speaking about unity and social cohesion to see the real situation and not just the statistical data, because what Mr. Antipovich mentioned, different experience of the war, different situations for different regions, for different categories of the society. And if we want to have cohesion, in this case, we have to have the solidarity approach, which sees all these different clusters of society in different regions. And our research, recently we had the evaluation of the risks in the frontline territories. Well, they show that I think that quite often these voice of the regions, on all Ukrainian level, we lack it. We use the average statistical numbers, and moving away from the statistical numbers, that is going to be one of the steps to enhance our unit. And recapping, so first of all, we have to remember that the war has given us a new experience and the Ukrainian society. Maybe that was the first time when we had no complex of the civil anarchism, and the society understood how important to have solidarity. We got this experience, but the thing is that it was not institutionalized, this experience. So this practice was not transformed into institutions. The second thing is that what we observe, a big role of supporting the institutions, and first of all, the president. The political leadership of the president is important for forming the national cohesion. But on the other hand, it's also the weakness. So the personified model of this cohesion. It means that our belief in our spirit is measured by one measure, and therefore for Ukraine, this diversified model of the social cohesion is important for us to have more factors which can work out. And I can say that belief in your own strengths, trust, believing in the armed forces of Ukraine, horizontal cohesion, and high evaluation of the potential of the local authorities and decentralization, that is something that that is on the positive side of the national union. What kind of further steps can we undertake? If we consider it from the point of view of sociology, we can see the clear hierarchy. So the maximum level of to the local authorities. So then we have regional uh, mayors, so then military and civil administrations, and then central political institutions. But nevertheless, it's not. I mentioned that not to measure who has higher rates or lower rates, but we have to understand that the cooperation of these three levels shows that there is a national union and cohesion in the society, especially on the regional level. It is impossible to resolve all the problems of the region from the center. On the other hand, the region, which has no attention from the center, also has to fight the problems itself, and especially when we are talking about the frontline territories, because they have the complex of threats, and there they have this strong feeling, and the society wants more attention from the central authorities, and to the center of the coordination of the frontline territories. I think that is a step in the right direction. And if we are talking about the horizontal social cohesion, I mean cooperation between different social groups and civil society and the others. So it seems like everything is fine because we have fantastic volunteer level of volunteers, and also there are some threats, and there is potential beside that. So we have big number, so to say, of civil activism. The problem is that how we transform a quantity into quality. And we have to understand it for us and for the representatives of the civil society, because at the moment, we have the competition of activism. The problem is that we have to transform it into the competition between those initiatives which have potential of systematic innovation. So, I mean, those volunteer initiatives or initiatives of the civil society which lead to the establishment of the new institutional practices and institutionalization of trust and social cohesion. Well, that's in fact. So, in brief, and one more important moment which I wanted to emphasize. Making decisions on the grounds of the solid data. When we are talking about social cohesion and data, well, in fact, there are some clear indicators, and the index of the social cohesion and multifactorial indicator, and in 4 years, it shows clearly the drop of the trust to political institution, and the index of the social cohesion should be the criteria of the evaluation of the work of the regional work and the ministries and the state infrastructure, because social cohesion is not something abstract. It's a contribution of different institutions, and we can see who is taking us down and who is helping us to preserve this level of social cohesion. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Volodymyr. And then I would like to give the floor to Mr. Andriy Romanenko. As Mr. Volodymyr said, the voices from the regions. So Mr. Andriy Romanenko, the coordinator of the National Platform from Donetsk Oblast. Your 5 minutes. Thank you. And I can say that in the last 12 years, Donetsk Oblast shows our resilience capability and how we can operate in the hard situation. And the part of the oblast was occupied since 2014, and nevertheless we were developing. We were able to continue working, even though we had lots of logistical problems, different utility, services provision, and the same thing is happening after the full-scale war. Donetsk Oblast continues to resist, and it happens in synchronization with the rest of Ukraine, but the big contribution to resist the Russian Federation is shown by Donetsk Oblast. Under the war and under the military actions, civil society and government found some consensus and gathered around important questions, that is humanitarian issues, information, and fortification. And now that are the key things we are focused on, and that is the positive tendency which we observed in the last 3 years and in the last 11 years of the hybrid and full-scale war of Ukraine. And nevertheless, there are some certain threats which we can see in Donetsk Oblast, and they are zoomed in Donetsk Oblast. That is the issue of the temporary occupied territories, and that is a very big challenge for the future, because at the moment we can see that the occupied territories on the state level is not something that is not worked on the state level. There is some kind of movement, and there are some attempts to get focused, to preserve this focus to Crimea, but that thanks to the Crimean members, and I would like to deeply appreciate them. And the future occupation of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia Oblast is something not very clear, and that will affect negatively then the process of the occupation. And therefore, the authorities can say that you see that the enemy can say that you see Ukraine got used to this loss, and they are not trying to do anything for people to stay in Ukraine. That is a bad tendency. We have to do something in the next years, and other problems which will potentially affect the level of resilience and cohesion on the territory where the hostilities take place or which are close to the front lines. There are some certain pause in democratic constitution. The pause in mechanism of engagement of the society in the decision making. I would like to remind you that on the territory of the Donetsk Oblast we have military administration, and the role of Ramada communities, like society, they are not making the decision. The decision is made by one person, that is the head of the military administration. Yes, under the martial law, that is a correct decision, because in this way we can respond to threats very fast. But at the same time, it's a very difficult region, the Donetsk Oblast, after the revolution of dignity. We had a gradual recover of the democratic institution, and people were getting interested more in the democratic life and their engagement in the society, and we posted that there is another challenge which we will have to resolve after the full scale after the occupation. And then there is another issue: what should we do with the temporary occupied territories, with Ramada? On the temporary occupied territories we have at least 4 big Ramada communities which are now occupied, and the majority of the citizens that is Mariupol, Bakhmut, Toretsk, and that is Vuhledar, and these communities are very big, and there are some smaller ones, but the majority of the citizens of these Ramada communities, they are on the territory of Ukraine, and at the same time, these Ramadas do not have these territories. Nobody knows what is going to happen on the territory, and I'm afraid that these illusions that will return, they will be returned very fast. It has affected the resilience of Ramadas, and after many people did not, after the government did not return to Mariupol, people lost the hope to return to Mariupol. And unfortunately, considering the war and the central authorities and the society pays not enough attention, and it will affect negatively the future of Donetsk Oblast. And another small remark: in these events, there is a positive aspect. Thanks to the full-scale war, the myth about Donbass was destroyed. Donbass will survive, which will not have this kind of hint of the Soviet Union. In fact, in Ukraine in the future, we will have to make up the new Luhansk, Donetsk Oblast, and a few more other regions. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for being brief. You were right on time. And now I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Lupatsiy. He has the mic. You are working on consolidation of the healthy political, geographical circles around resilience, and you are the ally of the National Platform of Resilience in promotion of resilience topics. So 3 years of war. What kind of experiences did we have? Where we are now from the point of view of our resilience and cohesion consolidation? It was said. It was said in one Ukrainian saying said, "We have flood, but we have to sue the wheat." So there is some kind of fatigue from what is going on, but nevertheless, we have no other option to change it. And in this case, the issue is that how can we become more efficient inside our system? And I think that we have three different levels which have very different logics and how the process are ongoing. We have international level. We were discussing it a lot, and therefore it's more familiar to us. And I think that everyone is focused on it. We have internal, formal level, the level of the formal institutions, and I think that on this level we have the changes, but they are happening not that fast, and they are happening much later than they should have taken place. And therefore, I think that the growth in 2022 and the fall of the institutional trust from Ukrainian society to the formal institutions later is not well understood in the political elite circles. So they still have the illusion that they can somehow make the decisions which will go top bottom. The vertical in Ukraine doesn't work well, and the part of the historical trauma is that Ukrainians instinctively are destroying this vertical. They are weakening it because they perceive it as the biggest existential threat, and therefore due to this factor, we have the third level, that is out-institutional, that is civil society. And here we have the question how this society functions. And here we have a few phenomena. So first of all, if we look at who is voting in the parliament for the budget, and if we consider how this coalition works in the parliament, we can see that there are mostly the people who were not participating Maidan and who were considering kind of opposition, not because they were actually the opposers, but the logic they had, they do not have the grassroots level activism. And when we look at how this situation is perceived by the foreigners, they also do not have the understanding on how it can function, how this kind of system can work, because it doesn't work in the same way in the world, in the rest of the world, because there is no such so many functions which are delegated to the civil society. And therefore, what do? They do the projection of themselves on us, and then they say, yes, that during this, in some time, we will lack this resilience. And I think that it will be correct to say that resilience is higher than whenever it was before. I do not want you to interpret this word that everything is fine and that we can relax and that the armed forces of Ukraine do not need the support. In fact, we have to understand that the biggest burden is the armed forces of Ukraine. The armed forces of Ukraine, they have the biggest burden. There are absolutely different threats, but we have to understand that resilience comes from the cooperation between these sectors, and this cooperation of these different sectors. And I think that it develops all the time, and therefore there is adaptation, and we are shifting from short and mid-term to long-term perception of the situation. Thank you very much. 30-second answer. So how do you think how non-institutionalized practices can become institutionalized, or maybe we have to refuse from institutionalization? No, I think that is a stage. I think that is a stage of the development of Ukraine, and people might not understand how we were doing that through civil society, because the state system will be working well and it will be calibrated and so on and so forth. But as of now, we are where we are now, and we have to understand how accountability which civil society has, how we can move to the formal sector. And in fact, we are finally on the stage when we can be discussing the reform of the public sector. So we have to forget our post-totalitarianism heritage we have from the Soviet Union, as a result of that Ukraine got the victory, not through the victory of the national resilience movement, but through the cooperation with communists and their readiness to become to choose the independence path, and those path which is so I think that we are in the stage to revise our past and to conclude it. So I remember the discussion with Vera Nanivska, in fact, the founder of the institutional de-Sovietization, which in 2000 raised the question that de-Sovietization is removing the Soviet practices. And I would like to invite Ms. Yulia Tyshchenko for the introduction of her position and the national platform on the accountability issue. Your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Well, it's really hard to be talking after such a big number of the aspects mentioned and different wise thoughts, but I think that we have to continue. And Andrei has already mentioned that we have to be talking not only about 3 years of the war, but at least the war has started in 2014, after the Crimean Autonomous Republic was occupied, and the further inaction of the Donetsk and Luhansk. Tomorrow, on the 26th, so we will have the anniversary of the Resilience Day in Ukraine. That is related to the occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So I think that unproportional threat to the response of the world was to what the Russian Federation did in Crimea. And that was the reason why the further actions. So that was a kind of encouragement element. And the threats we have today, despite the fact that we are, we're looking we're looking in aquarium, but that is the same aquarium with the picture changing inside. What is happening inside and outside? But nevertheless, those threats related to some certain global consequences for the security of different countries. So we were discussing, but nevertheless, they are growing and they will continue growing. As for the Ukrainian society, if we are speaking about the anniversary of the full-scale war, the war is remaining the factor which is uniting the people. Despite the fatigue, nevertheless, it unites, and we identify the common enemy. And today, this enemy was sending drones here, and in the morning they were bombing Ukraine with bombs. So this discourse, like we had yesterday in the UN, it doesn't work that way in Ukraine. So there are some certain transformation of the expectations and the expectations regarding the peace, what kind of peace it should be. These days we've heard a lot. How should it look like? Stable, fast, and we can be talking about the safe peace. Safe peace for Ukraine is are the guarantees of security, and that is both the work on our temporary occupied territories, so that is approval of the decisions, which in fact would not destroy Ukraine in mid-term and long-term perspective. Ukraine is not very Republican, and I think that speaking of this safe peace, even though it is not called this way in the society, but I think that there is some certain consensus in the society, because in Ukrainian society, uh, despite the risks so we have regarding economy, regarding countering corruption, but still there is the feeling that peace should be fair, just peace, because we need just peace. And I can call it some kind of strive for just peace. Beside that, I think that we didn't have a strong discussion regarding what is that, what is it for the society, how can we achieve it, and how can we interpret what is in common interpretation of the just peace can be in place for Ukraine and outside it. So I think that the network type of the civil society, and by the way, it's very well seen in self-government, and it's something we should not lose. So we were talking about the state government, and by the way, the risks on the on crisis situation to become deeper, they could have changed regarding because of the technical assistance we were providing. So I mean, in this case, there is in this case we have a need to revise these points of growth and engagement of the resources. So this network type of civil society should not be institutionalized. We will lose network in this case. And this network, this net and multifunctionality and communication with the government and with the business, it's the continuation and the grounds for these different sides of it. And as for the risks, different surveys show lack of communication. So to say that the feeling that there is lack of communication of the government, of different levels of government, mainly the central one and not the local ones, and the structures of the civil society organization, and that is some certain risk for the resistance, and we have to work on that. Thank you. We have 5 minutes till the end of this meeting, and they are for the final speaker. And my honor is to give him a mic to conclude today. That is anniversary of the resilience, which started in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and that was the grounds for the resilience of the entire Ukrainian society. Mr. Rafat, your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. 3 years of the full-scale war have actualized the topic of the occupied Crimea. Raising the question of Crimea once again happens as the amplitude with very big rises and ups. Remember the first summit of Crimean Forum. So in the declaration, it said that the parties agree that the occupation of Crimea can be possible only through peaceful negotiations in diplomatic ways. So I don't remember the exact wording, but the sense was like that. And in August 2022, it is said that this war has to be ended by the occupation of all the territories, including the Crimea. And there is an emphasis on Crimea because the war has started with Crimea and it has to be ended in Crimea. And that is the first thing I would like to mention. But at the same time, we should say, and I was talking about these kind of fluctuations, and now we are in the times when this actualization of Crimean topic go through the ways which makes us worry a lot, because nobody says that we have to give up Crimea, but some of the politicians mean that. So I mean, like the politicians, external politicians. So what should we do in these situations? We have to send all the possible messages to preserve the expectations of hundreds of thousands of people to return Crimea to Ukraine, and that is extremely important. We have to enhance their spirit. And the second thing is, we have to support all of those people who are openly resisting. They are opposing the Russian Federation. First of all, there are Crimean prisoners. And of course, we have to give the full vision of Crimea. Mr. Dmytro was mentioning the cognitive deoccupation, and that is very important for Ukrainian society as well, because we are talking about some certain occupied territories, including Donetsk, Luhansk Oblast, and Crimea. On the grounds of the current legislation, even despite the fact that it's not perfect yet, but when it comes to the temporary occupied territories, we first of all have to do the de-Russification, decolonization, decommunization. We are very shy about that, especially when it comes to Crimea, and I do not have time to dive deeper into the details. But in this case, we have to rush, not maybe to rush, but we have to act in the way that the whole world would understand that Crimea is Ukrainian territory, and we have, despite it is occupied, we have to do all the actions we do regarding the other territories of Ukraine. We should not expect until the Crimean Republic will be returned. And also we have to give the understanding. We have to explain how important it is, because we cannot amend constitution during the war, but nevertheless there are the other laws. We have focused on the on the national law in Ukraine. We have to show the world how Ukraine sees the occupied Crimea and how we are going to develop it, and that Crimea is going to be one of the stimulus and maybe some important element of the construction of those security, safety, which will be in those regions. And that is the end of my speech, and we should not be shy. First of all, it concerns the higher establishment and all Ukrainian politicum. We have to give. So all our arguments are important, and also referring to the international law and the rest of the. So it is important to mention that it's Ukrainian territory, and we have to continue that. But at the same time, we have to give them the other arguments. That is the territory of the Crimean Tatar. That is their motherland, and they should not. The destiny of their motherland should not be resolved without them. That is also the part of Ukraine. This formula gives us the opportunity to be saying that nothing about Crimea without Ukraine and without Crimean Tatars. So I think that these positions, they have to be enhanced on all of the levels of any kind of context or negotiations of Ukraine with the other partners. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rafat Daga. And you were right on time. The only thing I would like to do is to thank all today's participants and also the panelists online and offline, and the audience for participating in this event, which is organized in the framework of the National Platform for Resilience and Cohesion, and with the support of the European Union. So the sun is so big thanks to our defenders who are giving us this opportunity to be talking about the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale war, the 11th anniversary of the war of the Russian war in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.